Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Veronica Vargas Stidvent, Executive Director of the Center for Women in Law, and I'm very excited to welcome you to the latest installment of the Center's Ex Libris Series, which hosts discussions with authors and their timely and relevant books. And we're very excited during this March to celebrate Women's History Month with a discussion of her honor, stories of challenge and triumph from women judges. And today we welcome the book's editor, Lauren Stiller Rikleen, and two contributors to the compilation, Judge Bernice Bouie Donald and Justice Nan Duffly. So thank you for joining us. We're really excited about the book. I know people can get it from the ABA and also on Amazon. And I will say that Lauren would really appreciate it if you would go ahead, if you've read the book, go ahead and submit your Amazon review. That would be very helpful. Today's event has been approved for 1 hour of ethics CLE by the Texas State Bar. So if you're watching us live via Zoom, you will receive an email this afternoon with information on how you claim that credit. If you happen to be calling in by phone, please let us know that you attended, and you can do that by sending an email to Center for Women in Law, that's all one word, at law.utexas.edu. And I hope that all of you will feel free to post your questions to the panel in the Q&A, and you can do that at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A button. So thank you so much. For those of you who are joining us perhaps for the first time, the Center for Women in Law is a national resource and champion for women lawyers, generating lasting change within the legal profession. And we pursue that mission in a variety of ways, including programs like today's Ex Libris event, which is made possible by the support of sponsors and donors like you and so many of the folks who are watching today. Please know that gifts of any amount, and I do mean that, any amount, support our programs and initiatives at the center and advance our mission. And we thank you so much for your generosity. And I know that we have dropped in the chat a link if anyone would like to make a donation to the Center for Women in Law. So without further ado, let's meet our Ex Libris guests to talk about the book. We're very excited to be joined today by the Honorable Bernice Bouie Donald, a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. Welcome, Judge Donald. Prior to being appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals by President Barack Obama in 2011, she served on the U.S. District Court for over 15 years. She was the first African-American woman to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Tennessee, the first African-American woman to serve on the U.S. bankruptcy courts, and the first African-American female judge in Tennessee. She received her JD from the University of Memphis School of Law, an LLM from Duke Law School, and an honorary doctor's in law from Suffolk University. Judge Donald is a member of the prestigious American Law Institute and the American Bar Association Judicial Division. She served as chair of the ABA Criminal Justice Section, focusing on issues concerning implicit bias, children of incarcerated parents, mass incarceration, and the collateral consequences of incarceration. Judge Donald also served as chair of the Center for Human Rights and chaired a committee which published an implicit bias resource book for judges and practitioners titled Enhancing Justice, Reducing Bias. Having previously served as secretary of the ABA, Judge Donald served in the ABA House of Delegates until August 2018. She has been faculty at the National Judicial College, the Federal Judicial Center, and the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School. She served as jurist in residence at American University, Washington University, University of Cincinnati School of Law, and the University of Georgia School of Law. In addition, she has served as faculty for international programs in more than 20 countries. She is co-editor of the upcoming book, Reducing Bias, Extending Justice, to be published by Carolina Press. And I'm very excited, if you haven't been watching our news at the center, she's also the recipient among numerous awards. She is a 2023 recipient of the Hortense Ward Courageous Leader Award, and we will be celebrating her in Austin next month. So thank you, Judge Donald.
Thank you.
We're also joined today, I'm very excited to be joined today by Justice Nan Duffly, who served as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts until her retirement in July 2016. Prior to her appointment to the SJC in 2011, Justice Duffly served for 8 years as Associate Justice of the Massachusetts Probate and Family Court, and for 11 years as Associate Justice of the Massachusetts Appeals Court. She is a member and past president of the National Association of Women Judges and served as NAWJ's delegate to the ABA's House of Delegates and as liaison to the ABA's Commission on Women in the Profession. As a member of the ABA, Justice Duffly served as a commissioner on the Commission on Women and on the Hispanic Legal Rights Commission and was active in the Minority Caucus. She serves as an elected member of the ABA Council of the Section on Civil Rights and Social Justice. She is also a founding member of the Asian American Lawyers Association of Massachusetts and has served as a member of the Steering Committee of Lawyers Defending American Democracy. She has taught civil procedure and family law at Northeastern University School of Law and legal methods at Harvard Law School. Throughout her career as a lawyer and a judge, Justice Duffly sought to promote equal access to justice and a diverse legal profession. She became the first female litigation partner and the first partner of color at Warner and Stackpole, now K&L Gates. As an attorney, she served on numerous boards and committees that sought to promote access to justice. The first Asian American woman appointed to any court of the Commonwealth in its history, Justice Duffly has mentored judges, lawyers, and law students, and has worked to increase collaboration among judges, legislators, educators, and practitioners to increase diversity in the profession. A frequent speaker and lecturer, she has advocated for increasing the number of women on state and federal courts in the United States, as well as on courts of other countries. So welcome, Justice Duffly.
Thank you.
And last but not least, the editor of her honor, we're very excited to welcome Lauren Stiller Rikleen, president of the Rikleen Institute for Strategic Leadership. And she's a nationally known speaker, trainer, author, and consultant focused on building a diverse, respectful, and inclusive workplace culture. She is also a board member and interim executive director of Lawyers Defending American Democracy, an organization devoted to the protection of democracy and the rule of law. In addition to being the editor of her honor, she's the author of more than 200 articles and 4 books, including The Shield of Silence, How Power Perpetuates a Culture of Harassment and Bullying in the Workplace, and You Raised Us, Now Work With Us, Millennials, Career Success, and Building Strong Workplace Teams. Her extensive background in professional and community service includes numerous leadership roles within the ABA, including past service on the Board of Governors and serving as a former president of the Boston Bar Association. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the ABA's prestigious Margaret Brent Women Lawyers of Achievement Award and being named by Public Media's Next Avenue as one of the 50 most influential people in aging. She's a former law firm equity partner and founder of the firm's environmental law practice. For 20 years, she was recognized in Best Lawyers in America, and she was also recognized in Chambers USA, America's Leading Business Lawyers, and Massachusetts Super Lawyers. So thank you very much and welcome, Lauren. I can't wait to talk about this book. So I know the first question I had, and I hope our audience has, is for you, Lauren, which is why this, why now, how did this book come about? And can you tell us what is the common denominator? What is this thing that these folks share? All the contributors to this book, and they're all fabulous. All these stories are great, but what's the connector?
Sure. Well, thank you. The easy answer is that in August of 2020, I was approached by someone from the Judicial Division of the ABA. They were in the process of creating an editorial board. They were looking to build up a body of books. And one of the editorial board members had this idea that they ought to produce a compilation of stories by prominent women judges. And the person who had that idea suggested reaching out to me to see if I would be interested in serving as editor. And I think we all remember what we were doing in August of 2020, which is sitting at our screens at best. And I thought, wow, this could be really something very meaningful to be working on during a pretty dark time. But the couple of challenges, the biggest challenge was 2 challenges, actually. One was, how do you want to define what is prominent in a country blessed with really amazing talent of women judges on the bench? And I actually came up with the idea that there would be a very clean way to do that, which is to start with those judges who have been honored with the Margaret Brent Award. It was just an easy demarcation. The trick was we had to have enough of those judges say yes, and thanks to your other guests today who have been awesome and helpful as always. We did have more than enough say yes. So that part was terrific. And then the second piece was I felt really strongly that it needed to be a book of personal stories about challenges and obstacles and how these judges overcame those, and not, I was really lucky and I had great mentors, which, you know, having been through many panels and opportunities to be in the audiences of many panels, I know that it can be the default position for women. I was lucky I had great mentors. So that was the challenge to overcome in working with these incredibly talented people who often did want to say I was lucky and had great mentors, and just try to get a little deeper on their stories.
And what the result is, what was interesting to me is it doesn't seem random in terms of the compilation of stories. There is this sense of history that flows through, in part because it is organized chronologically, you know, by, correct me if I'm wrong, the birth year of those judges. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, so before we went out to the judges with the request, which actually Judge Donald was very generous, along with her counterpart on the Ninth Circuit, Judge McEwen, in signing a letter, an ask that went out to the judges. I worked with the Ed Board to compile a list of what we were looking for. And it was very specific about the kinds of issues and challenges we hoped that they would want to address, you know, relating to pay equity, sexual harassment, you know, bias experienced both pre on the bench and while on the bench. And so they had a list, and that's why I think there is a common theme that we were very, you know, very mindful about what kinds of obstacles we were looking for, because to me, what really mattered is that at the end of it all, this be a book that somebody early in their career or at any stage of their career could pick up and really relate to what they were reading and see themselves in their own lives.
And I think it is relatable. And also I was hoping that younger readers would pick this book up, because there is a tremendous historical value in it. And you mentioned that we're blessed with so many talented women judges, but the sense from this book is that was not always the case. And that was not an easy journey. So I wanted to turn for a moment to Judge Donald and Justice Duffly, because I was struck in particular by your stories. And Justice Duffly, you began yours with saying, how does a Chinese Dutch immigrant from Indonesia who spoke no English on landing in Portland, Oregon, a few weeks shy of her 7th birthday, decide to become a lawyer and eventually a member of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court? I thought that was a great setup. And Judge Donald, in your story, you have this great anecdote about seeking judicial office and showing up somewhere and people are waiting for the judicial candidate. And you've been sitting there and they said, when is this Donald person going to show up? And you say, I've been here this whole time. Oh, you don't look like a judge. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, about what it means to see yourself in those roles and how that may be the first step in making change. So Judge Donald, maybe we can start with you about that, and how envisioning yourself in these roles is maybe the first step in the right direction.
I'm happy to do that, although I was going to defer to Justice Duffly, but let me first of all thank the incomparable Lauren Rikleen for Yeoman's efforts, for her vision and creativity in bringing this to fruition. She's a tireless advocate for women and a tireless advocate for justice. There's something you said, Veronica, in your prelude to the question, and that was about the recency of history. You said it hadn't always been this way. And I think sometimes because we look around now and we see women in prominent positions, we see women lawyers, women judges, and a female vice president, and we see women in all branches of government, including women governors, we can lose sight of the fact that women didn't get the right to vote until late, and that the struggle to break the glass ceiling is only very recent. And we have to be careful to make sure that we strengthen the guardrails to make sure that we never go backwards. There's a tendency for people to say, it's 2023, why are you still talking about things like, gender bias, gender parity? Why are you still advocating for women? And it's because we're still not there. We have not yet achieved those things. And in a democracy, we want to get to a point where people are valued, not because of their gender, but they're valued because of the talents they bring, and all of them are valued equally. This equal justice under law and equal opportunity should not be taglines, but that is a reality to which we all must aspire. Now, how did I start? When I think about the fact that I sit on, I did until January 20th, the U.S. Court of Appeals, one level below this U.S. Supreme Court, that was unimaginable from my beginnings. There was nothing about me or my existence or my environment that ever suggested that I could move much beyond those humble beginnings. But I want people to know that inside of each of us, there is a yearning, there is an ember to achieve one's highest and best potential. And sometimes people will seek to snuff out that ember, and other times they will lend their own energies to make that blossom into a flame that guides you. But it never happens just because of you. It happens because other people around believe you and encourage you and make a way for you. And I know we talk about mentors, but we also have to have sponsors. We have to have those people, those hidden figures in our lives who will speak our names in places that we don't even have access to, who will validate our existence, who will also light the path that we're going to trot down. And I think it's important now, probably more than ever more, because I can't tell you, Veronica, and I know I'm veering from your question, but I can't tell you how many times I hear people talk about imposter syndrome. I think now, because we are in so many different places, for some young women who are just starting in their careers, they may see and say, how can I do that? Or they may feel overwhelmed because others have done it, and how do I get there? And I think Her Honor provides some wonderful guides for people who maybe are shy about asking. They can take that in their own office or home or library and be encouraged by the path that folks like Justice Duffly has already brightened for them. And they will see that she's standing there with an outstretched hand, waiting to help guide them through her life's legacy and her learned experiences to get to where they're seeking to go. That's why this book is so important, even in 2023.
Thank you. Justice Duffly, I wanted to get your take on that need for imagination that Judge Donald mentioned, the idea of getting past imposter syndrome in part by saying, that could be me. And can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
I'd love to, except that I first have to say I'm always so happy to be on whatever panel Judge Donald is on, because she inspires me. And I'm not like trying to put her on a pedestal, but as a person, as a colleague who I recognize and have known for so many years now. I mean, we go so far back, as we were so few of us, kind of always see each other in a room. Not many people look like us in that room. And so she's just always been an inspiration to me too. And such wonderful to know that she is out there. And I think that's part of it, knowing that she is out there, right? That other she somewhere on the bench somewhere in this country or in your state, that gives you that beacon of hope, that something to look to say, yeah, she did that. I can do that. So, and how did I get to that point when I actually had never met a lawyer in my life? That's a question I sometimes have, where did I get the idea that, other than people said, you talk a lot, you ought to be a lawyer, which I did get a lot. So I suppose that was part of it. But after that, it certainly never crossed my mind. I mean, getting to the hurdle of, oh, I can go to law school, and which came about because I was a child of the 60s and saw the need for change, and recognized that law was this powerful tool. It was just a tool that you could harness for change. And so I grew up in a time of change, and that's my talkative self figured, okay, I can be that lawyer. And so I chose that, and it was a while, I have to say, after being a lawyer, before it even occurred to me, I can not only be a lawyer, but actually affect a different amount of change that also has broad reach by becoming a judge. And how did that happen? I think it probably was a kernel of a thought somewhere buried, a little ember, but hadn't gotten a flame. And I recognize this because I used this memory. I was sitting with, having lunch with a woman who I went to law school with, who later also started her career as a probate court judge in Massachusetts. We were just having lunch. We worked at different firms. And she said, oh, I'm going to apply to be a judge. I'm thinking of becoming a judge. And at that instant, without even a thought, I said, me too. And I think that, not a conscious thought, but someone spoke it, right? And she said, I'm going to do it. And I said, me too. It just slipped out. It must have been there. And so that was the spark. And then I had a wonderful mentor. I think we do need our mentors, who had returned to the practice where I became a partner from the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. And so, again, he was that person, that guiding person who helped guide me to the people who would become influential to my being appointed ultimately. And those are all so important. And I recognize and remember those moments, seeing the Bernices and my friend Christy, and remembering how really it doesn't take a lot of my energy to do that for them. Just remembering, though, that it actually is helpful, I think, was a big wake up for me.
And Justice Duffly, you do talk about your mentor in your section, and I think that was an interesting theme that came across too. There's a lot of interactions with people in these anecdotes where particularly men might view women as interlopers and as a threat to the status quo. There's also some great stories of men who say, you know what, you should try this. You should reach for this. You should extend yourself. And so can you talk a little bit about that, and what is the role? And it seemed in particular in earlier chapters, because men were the sole gatekeepers, that they played a pivotal role in that. Can you talk a little bit about the role of men as sponsors and mentors and gatekeepers, and what your thoughts are on that?
I think they're crucial because men were the only people who occupied the jobs at that point. And if you didn't have a man to help you, I mean, there were very few other people. There was a woman appointed to the probate and family court at some point, but I mean, all of these single individuals came really pretty much after I became a lawyer, or not much before. So there was, and I didn't know them. So in my case, Sam I remember he had 4 daughters. He returned to practice from the bench because he wanted to educate them all. And he had a very strong marriage and a strong wife who didn't work outside the home, but nonetheless was a strong female in his life that was important to him. And I mean, I think he just always assumed that you felt from him, you can do this. Women, there's no difference. Women can do this. You want to do this. He loved being a judge. And that was the biggest thing. He so much loved being a judge, and so wished he didn't have to make the choice to leave in order to educate his 4 daughters, who he introduced to me too. So I could speak to them about working, and living the life at that point as a partner in a law firm. So he was key. He really was. I don't know how I would have done it without someone who knew what I should be doing, talking to. I mean, that it took people out there knowing that I wanted to be a judge. I mean, I had no clue. I don't know that I would know how to do that if I didn't have some guiding hand.
And Veronica, if I could just
Sure.
tag on to what Justice Duffly said, you know, I had never thought about being a judge. First of all, even being a lawyer was something that really wasn't in my ambit, because I came from parents who were not parents of status. They were loving parents, but they were, you know, sharecroppers. And there was no expectation, I don't think, from the community that much good would come from the community in which I lived. But I lived in a community when the South was still very segregated. And the first lawyers I ever met were 3 young white lawyers who probably were members of the ABA, who came, 2 of them from New York and 1 of them from California, into my town, Olive Branch, to help desegregate public facilities and to help people register to vote. And because Olive Branch didn't have a hotel and because they were outside interlopers, they were unwelcome. And so they stayed in the homes of people in the community. And I looked at those young people and I thought how wonderful it was for them to travel so far from home at great risk to themselves, and how unselfish it was for them to come and to help a people that they didn't know and to whom they had no responsibility for. But I thought how wonderful it would be to be a lawyer. But when I looked at them and looked at myself, there was nothing about me that suggested that I could do that. So I put it out of my mind. And later on, the desire to help people in juvenile court encouraged me to go to law school. And I'll skip some things, but I became a lawyer and became a public defender. And I have always been outraged by injustice. I still am today. And it was an act of injustice at the hands of a judge that caused me to take the radical step of deciding that I was going to be a judge, and I had to run for elective office. And you know, I believed then and I believe now that people should never have to surrender their dignity, their human dignity, for the cause of justice. Justice doesn't demand it, and we can't demand that. And because I saw that, I thought, you know, I can do better than that. And I made the decision at a young age to run for judge. And fortunately, I was successful. But on this thing that Nan mentioned about men and mentors and sponsors, from the first time I ran, one of the influential forces was the union, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And their union director was a tremendous sponsor, helping me gain access, helping me to relate to voters. And when I was being considered for the circuit court, it was a white male, George Barrett, who's now deceased, out of Nashville, Tennessee, who called me and told me there's going to be a vacancy. And some of us have talked about it, and we think you'd be good for it and you ought to apply. But he didn't just call me and do that. That man worked tirelessly to help me get there. He had access to people and places that I didn't even know existed. But he worked so hard that at one point I felt like I've got to do this because I don't want to disappoint him. Yes, it's important for us to have mentors and sponsors and allies at every stage for all of those reasons. But then once we get there, we have a fundamental enduring obligation to do the same for other people. And not just for women, but we have the obligation to do that for lawyers of goodwill, because even though we know, and we are students of law, we're judges, we know that laws are not self-executing. The laws are only fulfilled if men and women of vision, men and women of courage, men and women of commitment will put their hands to that arc and push and pull it in the direction of justice. And we have to do that.
And just to add one thing to what Judge Donald just said, and you know, in her always inspiring words. But both Judge Donald and Justice Duffly, really, when they talked about sponsors who made a difference, and I think it's why when I was sort of developing some criteria around this book, it's why the word mentor does bother me. I know, I mean, it's wonderful, and if you have it, that's great, and blah blah blah. But as a practical matter, if you don't have sponsors, if you don't have people who will put their capital, their social, political, professional capital on the line on your behalf. You don't end up where Justice Duffly and Judge Donald did, because they have, it's very rare and it's much, much harder. So when we talk about what women need to do, it's always wonderful to have those confidants and those mentoring relationships, but having those people who will say, I'm going to help you and do what I can to make you succeed, that's all the difference in the world.
Mhm.
And it was a very common theme, I should say, among all of the participants in the book, even when they used the word mentor. And sometimes I did change it, but not always, but their mentors were always sponsors.
Right.
Lauren, you mentioned some themes developing as you were receiving the contributions to the book. Was there anything that surprised you? You've been working in this space for so long. I know you've been researching, studying, advocating. Was there anything that took you aback when you put together this book?
Actually, what surprised me in many respects was the depth of the stories and their background. I mean, I've known Judge Donald for a very long time, and I will say to this day, I can barely talk about her contribution without either crying or being angry. And I quote from, you're about to be in an article that I have coming out soon, because you said something so, you recount incident after incident where, many people would just say, I'm done, and you were never done, and you always moved ahead. But that story about how your role integrating a white school and the way you were treated by your teachers and others, and then a guidance counselor not telling you that you had college scholarship opportunities, just flattened me. I mean, it was trauma. And the reason why it so flattened me is because, and this is the part of the story I retell often, is that if you try to tell your story today in certain states in a book, you might not be allowed to. That book might be taken off the shelves. And that is what is so worrisome. And we have to keep our eye on that issue, because there were stories in that book that would absolutely be banned in Florida and in other states, because the authors talked about institutional racism. And that's what makes me a little crazy. And that's where I have to go inside and find Justice Duffly's grace that she always exhibits, no matter what. It's always been, we're from the same state. She's always been a role model for me. And I have to almost tap into my inner Nan Duffly to be able to not get crazy over some of these stories and where we are today in the telling of that history.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the telling of the history, because someone submitted a question in the Q&A that I think is apropos here, is despite all the progress that's been made, and I do think this book really documents and sets out, and like I said, it has an optimistic tone, despite all the stories that do flatten you. And yes, I was really still angry this morning thinking about that guidance counselor, Judge Donald, and I thought, why is that one in particular so bothersome? Because there are so many bothersome stories, and in part it was because you're snuffing, there's a malice to snuffing out promise for a young person, and there's malice throughout this book, but I thought that was particularly unsettling. But the question is about backlash. And in the context, you mentioned, Florida and other states that are looking at DEI issues and thinking about them in a different way. So can you talk about that? And the Supreme Court's going to be, ruling on affirmative action. Does this change the context of the book? Does it change what people should be doing? Does it change how we should be talking about these issues? Because the landscape is changing.
The landscape is changing, but I think that creates an urgency for us to educate. And what do I mean by that? I do a lot of implicit bias and diversity, equity, inclusion training, one of the questions I ask people is, who can tell me what an American looks like? You know, there is no singular profile of an American. And when we talk about denying the opportunity to teach the history of all Americans, then we're talking about denying people their own history. No matter what people tell me, you cannot erase my lived experiences. They are what they are. But that negative narrative that's in the book, that is part of America's history, the same as it is a part of Bernice Bouie Donald's history. And we talk about Black history, but Black history in the United States is American history, because we're not talking about Africa or, you know, Afro-Brazilians. We're talking about Americans. When we're talking about the history of Asian Americans, we're talking about America's history. So we cannot all of a sudden decide that we only want to focus on a segment of America's history. You know, one of the things I try to be not envious or jealous of things, but every time I hear people talk about, you know, they're graduating in high school graduation classes and all of that, and being able to connect with classmates, that is a source of envy for me, because I don't have that. You know, one of the losses that I had through going through the process of integrating a school with those 3 other African American women is that we were there, but it was not an inclusive environment. We were there physically, but we were not integrated into the fabric of that class. And so I don't have a high school graduating class. 2 of the 4 people who went through that experience with me are now deceased. So there are 2 of us who went through that. But that is the one thing that I always have regret when I am around people and they're talking about those things, because that is one of the things that I lost, one of the things that I forfeited for the cause of integration at that time. So we have to be embracing of at least the teaching of history. And we need to take a lesson here from the Germans. That was a horrible experience, but they don't try to hide that and say, okay, we can't talk about that anymore. They embrace it and they educate around it, because they never want to experience that again. And they own their negative role in that. So I just really, but you know, all of these people who are doing, these lawmakers who are doing this, there's a constituency that apparently supports that. And we as Americans, I believe, are better than that. People say to me sometimes, how can you not be bitter? My mother told me a long time ago, and this is what she taught all of us in her lessons to us, is that first of all, don't shun people who are different, because to those people, you are different. And she said, you cannot afford to hang on to jealousy and hatred, those kinds of things, and bitterness, because ultimately those things diminish you. They don't hurt the other person, but they diminish you. And so you can't afford that. And I can't afford bitterness. And you know, I am probably one of the most optimistic people, hopefully, that you will ever meet, because I love this country and all of its richness. I have learned from my experiences. And one of the things I've learned is to treat all people with dignity and respect, and to value the contributions that they make, wherever those contributions are.
Thank you. Justice Duffly, I know you're nodding your head.
Well, I'm nodding because this is why I always love to hear Bernie speak, you know, and it's always so moving, and totally understand that story and how important it is to actually have that optimism, which I share, even though today it would seem hard to be optimistic about America. Sometimes I feel not so optimistic. I try to remember, you know, we can get through this. We are strong enough. Our ideals, most of the people that I know, and I think there are others out there, hold on to those important ideals that actually brought my father, who worked as a 16-year-old in the Dutch underground. So he's very familiar with what was happening in Germany, and wanted to leave Europe because of what he saw there. You know, I arrived here carrying that optimism in this country and seeing it as that beacon, and lately feeling a little disappointed, but still, I think ultimately sharing with you, Bernie, just that sense that's still in there. We have to continue to be more optimistic and to work for, and I guess fan the flames of what we know is possible, given our heritage and our ideals that most of us share here. So I share that, and I love to hear her in particular talk about it because she does it so well. Thank you.
I want to pivot a little bit to the role of women in the judiciary, and the book does a great job of chronicling that trajectory to get to the point we are today, where there are actually a significant number of women judges. And there are some dueling ideas in the book. The quote from Sandra Day O'Connor that a wise woman and a wise man will reach the same conclusion, and contrasting that with Justice Sotomayor's idea of a wise Latina. So I was kind of wondering, and there's another part in there about this, the difference between thinking about women entering a male-dominated profession and feeling like they need to behave and act and look like men. And you can sort of, I'm imagining like the early 80s, suit and tie and the women wore and stuff like that. That idea and how that has evolved over time. And so what is it that women judges bring to the legal profession? Is it really different? Why is it important? Why is it important to have women judges?
Well, Nan?
Well, I think it's not because we're so innately, our genes are, our makeup is so innately different. I think it's because, at least for the two of us, maybe hopefully not for women who come after us, it's because our experiences perhaps were so different, because our roles were so different, because society, even ours, so late, right, was still evolving to the point where we had opportunities that men had, that our roles were not circumscribed by our gender, that what was expected of us was not so much as what was expected of sons because of our gender. So I think that we still are living that, and whether that can change may be going to depend on how we have raised our children, hopefully in a different way, and hopefully things will change.
Well, I would concur in Justice Duffly's comments, and I would also say that one of the things we bring is, as she said, our lived and learned experiences. It doesn't mean that we're going to decide cases differently than men, but we don't shed our personhood at the door. We bring our whole selves to the job. And I know that, senators will balk when somebody says that we all see things through the lens of our lived and learned experiences. It's true. And if it were not true, think about this. We all read the same, evidence and procedure books, and we all, read the black letter law. But people look at that law, they read it, and they interpret it through those lenses. And sometimes you come to different places. It's always good to have multiple perspectives, because all of us have biases. And if all of us come from the same set of life experiences, who is going to check us on our blind spots? Who is going to check us when we are not considering perhaps a perspective or a position that may not naturally come within this area where all of us think alike? And so I think that is an important dimension, and we're talking about women, but that is why I am such a proponent of making sure that we consider diversity broadly, not just gender, not just race or ethnicity, but also, of professional backgrounds, of geographic backgrounds, of the country's rich talent in law schools across, because all of that makes a difference, I believe, in the quality of justice. And going back to what I said before, if that were not true, we really wouldn't need appellate courts or Supreme Judicial Courts, because everybody would be reading the law the same and coming up with the same result, just like a computer. But it's not that easy. And we need that broad perspective with integrated perspectives and different lenses to look at these problems and these issues.
So we have about 15 minutes left. So I wanted to turn our attention to some of the questions that have been submitted from our registrants and through the audience. And one of them is, and Laura, maybe you can start us off with this one. What are the biggest obstacles for women pursuing a career in the judiciary?
Sometimes I think it's listening to the, advice of other people who may be sending negative messages instead of being helpful and inspirational, as you're hearing in the conversation today on the inspirational side. Too often I hear people say, oh, just discouraging words about all the reasons why somebody shouldn't do it. So part of it is putting aside all the negative messages that might be received. A second is, I think critical to anybody having career happiness at any level is to stay true to your authentic self. I think when people try to tell you you need to contort yourself to seem like this, whatever this is, you are doomed to live an uncomfortable life because it may not be if it's not who you are. So I think that's another critical piece of advice, which is know who you are, be who you are, and then present the best version of who you are as you seek that role.
And I would say the biggest obstacle really is getting there. The process of getting there has become intensely political and sometimes ideological. And people really, many people who aspire to get there are not quite sure how to do that. And I would say this, get involved in your bar associations. But prior to that, make sure that you are highly ethical and that you have a solid work ethic. Your record is going to speak for itself, but that is still very, very critical. And I go back to what I said before, even getting there, there'll have to be sponsors, people who are going to speak your name, who are going to look at your body of work and say, Veronica is a really super lawyer. She's hardworking, but she also is respectful to her adversaries and to the court. And she is fundamentally and unalterably committed to the cause of justice, and not just outcome justice, but to justice in its real sense. So making sure, keep in mind that you're building a record at every stage. You're building a record of an excellent lawyer or one who cuts corners. And when it comes down to it, the one who is the excellent lawyer, who's got the work ethic, who also contributes as she can to the community, those things are all going to be value added.
I just want to just follow up on that very excellent comment that you both made, the good comments. And I'm remembering, and I guess this is something to share, maybe worth sharing, that every time you interact with a lawyer, that lawyer may be asked to comment about you if you get to the point of being considered for a judgeship. And so that was, if you are that ethical person, if that's what they think of when they think of you, if they think of you as not just ethical, but also a good advocate, good lawyer, all those positives that you want to be thought of. I mean, that's important. And maybe in a small, Boston seems like a big city, but it's a small town when you think about, and I think that's mostly true. If you think of the community of lawyers, it's not that big. And some of those people get to be in higher places. One of the people who was one of the lawyers on the other side of me in a contested case became a legal counsel to the governor, very key in making recommendations to the governor about who might be a good judge. And his interactions with me helped him to come to that conclusion because he did make that recommendation. So of course, you don't live your life with that goal. You have to live your life authentically. That is the person, right? You have to be that person. I guess you can fake it till you make it, but hopefully you are that person who cares about their clients, who cares about fairness, who cares about strong advocacy, but also, being an appropriate advocate in the circumstances for your client. So yeah, you just have to live your life remembering you never know. You just don't know, I think.
There's always the part of me that's always, I guess, the lawyers defending American democracy side of me is always thinking about the institutional changes that are needed. And, the judges that we have here today are from very different ways in which judges become judges. And in fact, Justice Duffly and I are from Massachusetts, which is probably one of the last fully only appointed. You don't run to be a judge. It's a process. It's a pretty merit-based process, especially these days as compared to years ago, certainly. And I remember going when I first went to my first ABA meeting a long time ago and saw a T-shirt of a judge, like, vote for me with the judge's name on it, and was shocked. And somebody had to explain to me why I was seeing that, because I never heard of the idea that you have to. And now that, with so many states having contested elections and our politics being as difficult as they are, it has become harder and harder in general with respect to running for the position of judge. And I think from the institutional side, we maybe need to be thinking about how can we contribute to institutional change of those systems, tamping down some of how awful it has become, and whether there are changes that can be made to have a different selection process, or at least something that takes this kind of money and politics out of it the way it's become in so many states.
I don't have an answer to that, except that when I've asked that of people, because I've always wondered I don't know if I'd ever be a judge if I had to run for office. Yeah. I didn't want to be a politician because I didn't want to run for office. But when I can, and a member of the ABAs and other national organizations have had some opportunities to speak to people who've done that. And they actually, the answers I've gotten is, this is a good process. I can't imagine doing it your way. This is a fairer process. So maybe it depends on the eyes of the beholder. I don't know the answer to that.
Judge Donald, do you have a thought, having successfully run for?
Well,
judge?
I don't know that I can answer that question, but I will tell you that my run was for me a learning experience, and looking back on it, maybe because I won, I actually enjoyed the run because it got me in touch with so many people, and it got me an opportunity to talk about the justice system to people, and to really sort of debunk some of maybe the myths that I had in my head about how people viewed this along certain lines. It was really a phenomenal experience, but I think sometimes if you're in that race in a small community like ours, where you don't have people putting big money in there, you just have to depend on your friends and family to help you get through. It's probably a different situation. I did want to share one quick story about my own run. There was a man who was in the race, a lawyer, who asked me if I would get out if I didn't win the bar poll. And I told him, no, I wouldn't, because I didn't expect to win the bar poll. I was a pretty young lawyer, and I was a public defender, so I didn't know the people in the big law firms. But anyway, so I ran my race, and it was a really respectful campaign. At the outset of that, and on my campaign literature, which I designed myself because I didn't have money, but I had a rose on the campaign literature. So after I won and this man didn't, and there were other people in the race, on the first anniversary of my judgeship, this man came to court. I was in a limited jurisdiction court. He came to court and brought me one rose, and he took my staff and me to lunch to celebrate my victory. And every year, up until about 6 years, he would come to court every year, take my staff and me to lunch. And the second year there were 2 roses, the third year there were 3. But I think that, and I said to him one time, I hope that had you won and I didn't, that I would have acted the same way. I don't know that I would have, but I think we've lost that ability where people go through elections, and the person who doesn't prevail, treat the other person with dignity and respect and pride. And that was a microcosm of, I think, of campaigning. I only ran once. I can't say what it would have been like, and I had to do it a second time, but that lawyer, Steve Hallman, was just an amazing person who genuinely appreciated, I think, the way we ran that campaign. And while he didn't win, I think he believed that the system won.
Could I just follow up a little bit? Because what I'm thinking about, and Lauren, you mentioned this, I did speak a lot, and not just to other lawyers. I realized that actually, like I didn't know much about what judges did until I became a lawyer. And it's such an important part of who we are as a country. It's such an important role for us in our democracy. So I did speak a lot to high school classes, to people who weren't lawyers, which I think is not fairly all that common. But I thought it was a really good, I wanted to do it. I wanted people to know who we were. I wanted people to see me. I'm a person like you. You know, I'm outgoing, I'm not stiff, and everybody's always surprised. Oh, you're a judge, you know, and I think that's a lot of it, because
Yes.
I'm friendly, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
same
they
here.
know.
Yeah, I still speak a lot well, not as much now, but I did for years at high schools and
Right.
JC's events. And
Right.
I think that serves an important function, because we help to help people understand the system, and they can see how diverse the judiciary is, but they also get an opportunity to understand a little bit more about justice, that is not, just Judge Judy or whomever.
Well, we're getting close to time, so I want to end on this note. I'm probably combining a couple themes. Judge Donald, you talked about the importance of failure a little bit in your contribution, and I think it's true that this book is very inspiring. It talks a lot about overcoming, and one of the things I'd like to talk about is, being gracious in defeat or not being gracious in defeat, how we handle those failures. And one of the themes that was prominent in this book too was how to react. Do you react? Is it appropriate to react with anger in some circumstances? Is it appropriate to check your anger and work the system? Is it appropriate to win by succeeding in the long run? And and the women in this book really grappled with those questions at different points. How did I respond appropriately to that attack, or to that insult, or to that discrimination? And what is the long game and what is the short game? And having said all that, I'd love for you all to address that, but I also one thing that I took away from this was there's a tremendous sense of optimism, despite all of the things that are in this book. And a lot of it is very unsettling, and it's a reminder of how far we've come. My takeaway was we have a lot to be optimistic about, because if we could make that much progress, how much more can we make?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Judge
I'll be quick, but I think that it's so important to be gracious and to have grace in all these situations. And if in the times when I have not prevailed, I have always immediately reached out to the other person and congratulated them. I mean, genuinely. And one time I didn't win, I told the other person, who's now a friend of mine, I said, I went hard for this, I didn't get it. You did, but in hindsight, after I had time to get over my disappointment, I recognized that person should have gotten the job. Each time in a judicial position when I didn't get it, once I've been able to come out of my competitor's mode, I realized the right person was selected for that job. But it's to be gracious and take the long view.
So my experience is so different not having run for office, but some of the people I mentioned and some of the behaviors that I described, some of those people changed, and I've recognized that they had, and I didn't say, "Oh, you used to be a jerk, but now you're not." I mean, it wasn't anything like that. But I think I embraced them more in retirement and in public, because I'm still, I was still out in public, as all of these people mostly often are, and so that was one response. And in the other, that person didn't change, called me up and asked me, if I would recommend them for an advancement and support them, and said, well, no, I didn't think I could do that. And true to form, he hung up on me. Slammed the phone down.
No, and I would say, I think apropos of that, so many of the stories in her honor show people sharing about grappling with, in the moment, what do I do? And I would say the biggest theme to me from the stories were those who felt regret for not having been more direct in the moment, for not having spoken up in the face of indignity. That doesn't always mean yelling at somebody. It could be, you can handle situations in a variety of ways, but they regretted not in some way in that moment choosing the right way to speak.
So last word, what does this mean for the future of the legal profession?
Lauren?
I think we are right now in our profession, in our country, facing some difficult times. And I think that we all have to put on our activist uniform every day and make sure that as lawyers, we are standing up for justice and the rule of law. We are protecting our Constitution, our democracy, and doing the best we can, full circle to where we began, to make sure we are helping others achieve their goals and dreams in this profession, but that we are all working together to make sure that in the crazy times we are in, that our democracy does not become the loser. We have to fight for our democracy now and for our profession.
Right.
I concur.
Well said.
All right, then. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much, Judge Donald, Justice Duffly, Lauren Rikleen, for a wonderful discussion. The book is Her Honor. You can get it. It just came out this month, very apropos for Women's History Month. So thank you for your time today. As I mentioned, our program has been approved for an hour of ethics CLE by the State Bar of Texas. If you've joined us by Zoom, you'll get a follow-up email with that code to claim your credit. And if you've joined by phone, please email us at Center for Women in Law, all one word, at law.utexas.edu for more information. We'll get that information to you. Again, thank you for joining us. I hope you will consider supporting the Center for Women in Law and our mission. Every gift is very appreciated. And I invite you to join us for our future events, including our upcoming biennial award luncheon on April 21st, honoring Judge Donald with the Hortense Ward Courageous Leader Award. Be sure to follow us on social media and our website for upcoming information, programs, and events. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you all so much. And thank you so much to our panel today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.